So good morning, everybody. I think I should change my talk title from the Miracle of Life to the Miracle of Music. Yeah. So today, I want to begin by actually acknowledging a very special someone who is here today for the first time, my mother-in-law, Nancy Jo Chipman. This is her first time at Unity Temple. So Nancy Jo, or Mama Jo, as I call her, and I had a conversation early this morning before church. And like a good mother, she asked me whether I had had a healthy breakfast today. And so I turned to her, and I thought for a moment, and I said, well, I had eggs for breakfast. And she, kind of looks at me and says, scrambled? And I said, no, Cadbury. It's Easter after all, right? So wait, I have another Easter story for you. So as many of you might already know, I actually grew up in a Buddhist family, but I grew up in Southern California in a primarily Protestant community. And so even though we were not Christian by religion, I got to celebrate all the fun things of Easter. And so I got to eat those squishy yellow marshmallow peeps, and I got to dye the eggs in, that traditional food coloring dye, and we got to do Easter egg hunts. And so I got to enjoy, the annual traditions of Easter, the fun parts of Easter. But as some of you who have actually talked to me might already know, I've always been a very serious, and even as a kid, I was even more serious and more philosophical. So as a child, while I looked forward to certain aspects of Easter, what I dreaded every Easter was the return of this nagging life philosophical question. So every Easter, I would go and turn to every single adult that I could find and ask this all-important question, which was this: what do bunnies and eggs have in common? Year after year, no one could answer this question to my satisfaction until one day a very special man shows up at my family home, and he sits and he has tea with my parents for a while, and I'm waiting for my chance to pounce on him. And then as he finally gets up and he heads toward the door, I run over to him and I said, sir, and I'm pulling on his coattails. I said, sir, what do bunnies and eggs have in common? And he peers down at me, and his lips part ever so slightly, the way eyes open gently in the morning. And he said, life. I said, life? What kind of answer is that? Back then, I thought perhaps, because I was a little kid, he was just humoring me. But only later, as I progressed on my spiritual journey, like 20 years later, did I come to fully realize the depth of the wisdom teaching that this gentleman was imparting on me. Because what he was saying was that life is universal. Life is in the bunny, life is in the egg, life is in that baby, life is in you and in me, as equally as life was in Jesus Christ. And not only is life universal, but life is eternal and enduring. Yes, life is eternal and enduring, even in the face of appearances to the contrary. So, as Jesus taught, it is by our faith in his demonstration of life that we come to know and deeply comprehend the true life of spirit that transcends even physical, psychological, and emotional death. As said in John chapter 10, verse 10, Jesus came that we should have life and that we should have it abundantly. And at the same time, if you're anything like me, we can tend to repress this more abundant life by fiercely clinging to the old, the past, right? And by never allowing that new life to be expressed through us now as Christians here in unity. The story of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, which we are, in a sense, going to be reenacting today in the flower cross ritual, is a key part of our religious identity. But unlike in traditional Christianity, unity maintains that the main point of Jesus' death and resurrection was not Jesus' suffering, which is temporary, but rather Jesus' demonstration of life, which is eternal. Indeed, Jesus showed us that the opposite of death is not life, but birth, and that life truly has no opposite. It simply is. It exists free of any worldly limitations, including even death. So, as we come to live more fully from this truth, we live the promise of freedom, freedom from our worldly struggles, freedom from our attachments, freedom from our suffering. When we do, as Jesus taught us to do, come to know the truth that indeed sets us free in consciousness. And as we identify less and less with our worldly bodies and identities, and more with that indwelling Christ, we live in the peace of knowing that I am not this body, I am not this job, and I am not this role. Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore metaphysically interprets Easter in this way. He says that Easter represents the awakening and the raising to spiritual consciousness of the I am, that is to say, the Christ nature in humankind, which has been buried too long in the tomb of materiality. And he also taught that the resurrection takes place in each of us every time we rise to the realization of Jesus's perpetual indwelling life in us, connecting to the Father. So this new flood of life happens when we connect to that Christ within and open our minds to the Word of God. So now, this doesn't mean that we no longer have experiences of loss or of death, even within our lives, and we could many, many times within a life. This sort of death might have occurred even recently for some of you, or it might be happening right now in your lives. I know for me that this kind of death happened as I made my transition to ministry. As I did, I consciously let go of my salaried associate attorney position in a downtown law firm in San Francisco, and I moved forward on this journey. That was a conscious decision. What I didn't realize were these unforeseen circumstances that would cause me to, in the several years following that, also lose my home, also lose a relationship, and also become that close to filing for bankruptcy. In the midst of this dying to my old self and my old life, in the midst of each of us doing that, we can turn to fear and bitterness or we can turn to faith. By choosing faith, certainly with the help of my spiritual community, I was able to open myself up with gratitude to a new life. And I have to say that beyond a doubt, that the life that I have today is by far richer and more abundant on every level than the life that I could have even dreamed of, even sitting in that high rise in San Francisco with an awesome view of the San Francisco Bay. The new life that I have right now is far more abundant than the life that I could have dreamed of in my old existence. So while each of our crosses is unique, the spirit of life in us is universal. Whether the loss that we might be experiencing now or might have recently experienced feels small or feels great and vast and overwhelming, we know through the memory of Jesus that there is a spirit in us that cannot die. Eckhart Tolle taught, death is a stripping away of all that is not you. The secret of life, then, is to die before you die, and then to find that there is no death. So, as we consciously prepare for this flower cross ritual today, I invite you to remember this truth within yourself. Consider how different your life would be if you affirmed faith in spirit during even the most challenging times in your life, so that you might do as Jesus did ultimately upon his last breath, say, "Into thy hands, Spirit in me, into thy hands I commend my life." So as each of us approaches the cross today, I invite you to consider saying this prayer as you place your flower on the cross, representing your release of old conditions and your receptivity to miracles, to abundance, to new life. Into the hands of Spirit that is within each of us, and yet which is greater than ourselves, we can submit our lives that we might come out of any life challenge triumphant and saying, as they did in Galatians 2:20, "It is no longer I who live, but it is Christ who lives in me." So in conclusion, the miracle of the resurrection means absolutely nothing if we don't lay claim to it in our lives today. When we recognize our eternal nature as expressions of that one indwelling Christ Spirit, then all of the different phases and the ebbs and flow of our lives all become causes for celebration. As theologian Phillips Brooks preached in the late 1800s, "Let every man and woman count him or herself immortal. Let him catch the revelation of Jesus in his resurrection. Let him say not merely, 'Christ is risen,' but 'I shall rise.' But from within, always, 'I shall rise.'" And so, from within, we begin by preparing ourselves now for a time of meditation, and then we'll go into the flower cross ritual. But as you enter into that inner chamber, that secret place of the Most High within yourselves, I invite you to ask yourselves this question: that what does the bunny and the egg and you and I and Jesus have in common? Thank you.